Welcome back to another episode of Comes a Time. That's O'Teal.
And that's Mike. We had a really good one this time. I actually thought it was a long shot getting him, but I just was like, hey, what the hell? His name is Jeffrey Mishlove. I guess he would be Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. He's probably the first person to ever get a doctorate, a PhD in parapsychology from UC Berkeley. And he's been around longer than he looks. A lot of these, he comes with a lot of empirical evidence for all kinds of paranormal and psychic phenomena. And what a great conversation, man.
Yeah, this was interesting. He does look younger, and
He don't look 75, does he?
well, doesn't that kind of play into the thing that we've talked about a bunch too? Like, you look at some of the folks that have been doing psychedelics a good chunk of their life, and they age so much more gracefully, I guess. Like, you hit some bumps in the road, but you make it a little longer and further. So I think it's like when you're not too tied into this world, you tend to stay a little longer on it, Maybe that's the case. I don't know.
I think you get energy, like it's a gas tank too. You get energy from that world.
Yeah,
and it
totally
keeps you. I mean, look at Stevie Wonder. There's a lot of spiritual energy flowing through that cat. Does he look his age? Nope.
No.
I mean, there's a lot of people that he's a special human. I don't even know where to start. You just got to watch this one.
Yeah, enjoy it, everybody. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and we will catch you next time. Peace. Stay safe.
I started out in radio at KPFA, Pacifica Radio in Berkeley, back in the days when John Cage was around. And at one occasion, I just invited about a dozen of my friends into the studio just to see what would happen. And it was total chaos. They were all talking over each other the entire time.
Another incredible Bay Area experiment, huh?
Yeah. It would have been 50 years ago.
Wow. You look really good for your age, because I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts, and I heard you say that you were going to retire soon, and you're thinking about handing it over,
maybe retire isn't the right word.
Yeah.
Slow down a bit, and I'm bringing in 2 new guest hosts.
Excellent.
Yeah. And you said you were like 75. I was like, wow, I did not think that.
I'm 75.
Wow.
You
really
have
glad to have you here.
It's one of the fears as a bald man. What I have is that, you look at some of the family members and how their skin has aged. Some folks with the bald head, we kind of have those, it almost looks like a burnt slice of pizza, little cheese bubbles and stuff, little burnt crust spots. But you look phenomenal. Yeah, that's you look great. I hope my head
and I feel great. People are living longer.
What's your secret?
I can't say for sure. I take good care of myself. I meditate. I do yoga. I think I'm probably good for another 20 years of active life.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Before I retire and maybe hopefully more years relaxing and enjoying the fruits of all I've done.
You've done a lot, man. There's so many interviews on your YouTube channel. It's unbelievable. It just goes on and on and on. One of the guests that you had is, I couldn't believe we actually scored him for the podcast, was Stanley Krippner, because we love to talk about anomalous experiences, and one actually happened to me today, connected to you, because I just started recording some segments for this thing called Dream Time. And when I pulled up your name on YouTube today, the latest thing you guys released is called Dreamtime with somebody Lackman. I was like, wow. And today, which I also forgot until social media reminded me, is the 3rd anniversary of when my brother passed away.
Oh.
So it's
wow.
like all this stuff coming together today. I was like, all right, I see. I hear you.
I had an interesting one this morning too, where I call into a group meditation call in the morning, the type, of meditation that I do. And I've been doing a lot of research about amino acids and the chemicals in the brain that help, either, serotonin or dopamine or all these different, and they kick off each meditation with a topic.
Mhm.
And some days it's, nature or crying or whatever. And they said, today we're going to talk about amino acids and all of the different, chemicals that make up a healthy brain. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, it was literally, I was like, I put my phone down from researching it and went on to a meditation, and that's how they started it. And I was like,
Right up your alley.
yeah.
I love the little ones like that. You get some big ones, and then you get little ones.
Yeah, it was a little one, but it reinforces it.
They still mean a lot. My particular way that I experienced psychic phenomena or whatever was actually the subject of your podcast today. Dream time. I dream into the future. Precognitive dreams. Very banal moments. Nothing like Stanley Krippner was the first one I heard talk about. Also ones that, because I don't feel like I could change mine, but I guess if something bad did happen that I could change it. And he was talking about those. But you came to it the same way, right?
Yeah,
Jeffrey? Dreams?
absolutely. My whole life has been changed by dreams.
Can you tell us about that dream that made your life take a left?
Well, there were several. There was one in particular that I wrote about in the Bigelow essay that I recently completed. And this took place in March of 1972. It was in one in which my uncle, great uncle Harry, came to me in the dream, and it was so powerful. I felt it was a heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul connection. And when I woke up from the dream, I was crying tears of joy and singing at the same time a very sacred song from a Jewish religious tradition, the song that's only sung normally during the Jewish high holidays. And then I wrote home. I said, how's Uncle Harry? I had a dream about him. I learned that he died almost at the precise time I was having that dream.
That'll do it.
That propelled me to change the direction of my career. I was at the time a graduate student at Berkeley in criminology. I was doing group therapy sessions with murderers and rapists at San Quentin prison. And I decided that the time had come for me to switch from looking at the negative side of human deviance to looking at the positive side.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting dream, huh, Oteil? I had a very similar one about my uncle.
Is that right?
My uncle was sick with cancer, and I visited him before I went on a 3 or 4 week tour doing stand-up. And I told my family, I don't want to know. If he dies, I don't want to know. Like, let me, find out when I get home. And I was in a hotel in Virginia, and I had a dream that my whole family was by a lake. And my aunt, a different aunt, said, go talk to your uncle. And I turned around, and my uncle went, blew by me, walked by me, and I could hear him and see him and, his whole essence. And he kind of blew right by me towards the lake. And I popped up in bed immediately, and I was like, he's gone. And I texted my sister, and I said, did he die? And she said, about 20 minutes ago. And I said, I just had this amazing dream that, by a lake. And she said, by a lake? Let me send you a picture from a view from his room at hospice. and it was a lake, and the sun was coming up over it, and it was exactly what I had seen, and it was too it happened too quick for anybody to even call and tell me, and yeah, it was a life changer for sure, because I knew that he came to say goodbye to me. It's really amazing. So wow, that's kind of incredible to hear you say that.
I think
Getting chills right now.
experiences like this are very common. And the sad thing is that people are afraid to talk about them mostly.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I loved about the interview I was listening to this morning called Dreamtime was that you were both correctly pointing out how recent that is. It wasn't since time immemorial we considered dreams where they rightfully in their rightful place of importance. And it's only really more recently, I guess, since the Enlightenment, that now we think, oh, that's just, what did he say? It was called foam. Some German guy said it. Dreams are just foam, like just extra.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a tendency since the last few hundred years to dismiss the inner world completely.
So I really would love you to talk about being the first, and maybe, are you still the only person to ever get a doctorate in parapsychology, and how you pulled that off at such an incredible university?
Well, the first thing I should do is qualify the statement. I believe I'm probably the only person in the world ever to receive a doctoral diploma that says on the parchment of the diploma itself, parapsychology as my field of study. But there are hundreds of people actually who have done doctoral dissertations on parapsychological topics. I did it in a unique way because I wasn't working in a standard university department. As I mentioned, I was in criminology at Berkeley. I got a master's degree in criminology, but I took advantage of a very unique program they had and still have at Berkeley, called the individual interdisciplinary doctoral major, where if you want to put together a dissertation on a topic and no department at the university is willing to sponsor you, but you can find professors from diverse departments who will sponsor you, then you can create your own unique degree. So that's what I did. And it gave me enormous freedom that most graduate students don't have to define my own field of study.
That's higher education right there. That's the way it should be.
I think so.
Yeah.
You must have been so relieved that you could find those 3 people to co-sign.
Eventually there were 5. And the odd thing is, right after I received my degree, there was enormous pressure on the university to revoke it, even before the degree had been offered. The skeptics wanted the university to cancel everything, and they put a lot of pressure on the university. And then after I got the degree, the university canceled the individual interdisciplinary doctoral major option at Berkeley. Now, I know they've reinstated it after I don't know how many decades, but it's a shame because interdisciplinary research is, to my way of thinking, very important.
Absolutely. I've been watching these CIA guys that are coming out about the UFO thing, and they say what they call OSINT, which is open source intelligence. So it's just everybody, people, the internet, people at a UFO conference talking. They say how much they learned from going to like MUFON conferences and Contact in the Desert and all these. I'm like, wow, these guys are going to the same conferences, people that I check out. And but open source intelligence is that bringing, if the whole village, someone over here goes, yeah. That's also why I want to talk about it, because it's like what Stanley Krippner said about he wanted to spread the word about this so that people wouldn't pathologize their own experiences. and think they're crazy or they're weird or they're schizophrenic or whatever. It's like, no, lots of people have these experiences.
And probably 2/3 to 75% of the population. The problem is that the so-called guardians of reality, the scientific and academic establishments, are the ones that keep it out. So that's why there's so few people. Nobody after me. I got my degree at Berkeley 40 years ago, 42 years ago, and it hasn't been done subsequently. That says parapsychology, and very few dissertations even on parapsychological topics. It's still considered taboo in academia, and it's a terrible shame. It results in people worrying, oh, I might be losing my mind, or I know I'm perfectly sane, but I can't talk about it because other people will think I'm nuts.
Well, when I dream into the future and it happens, I'm like, it happened.
Yeah.
You may have deja vu. I remember my dreams. It happened. So I get my proof,
And even from an academic standpoint, it kind of stinks how many square pegs have to jam themselves into the round holes that are offered to them. That part is really frustrating, because it's like, say you're interested in a certain part of psychology or whatever it may be, but you want to branch further to extend the lineage of the science or of the knowledge, instead of just read a book, take a test. Great, now you are going to go regurgitate what's already been said for the past few hundred years or whatever. So hats off to you for doing the work to bring it a step forward.
Our culture has changed enormously in the last 20, 30 years or so with the internet, with podcasts. You're a stand-up comedian. Do you bring this up on your comedy routines?
Yeah, I try to. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. We'll just put it. I try. I try. I have my fallback. 23andMe jokes and my whatevers. But yeah, the longer the goal of it is to just speak from the heart. I guess is really the important thing. Anybody could tell a joke about traffic or whatever, but I'd like to talk more about the dreams and the experiences and stuff for sure. Same with Oteil with music. I mean, it's
yeah. Well, we are allowed to do it more, but I don't know. I just think it's such a shame that the scientists are so dogmatic. And one of the great ironies I saw on your interview with, is it Stefan Schwartz?
Yes, Stefan Schwartz.
Stefan Schwartz. I think it was him, and he was pointing out at some point when, I don't know, where the church was obviously still more in control, and they just told the scientists, like, you deal with this and we'll deal with the spiritual, and let's just stay. And the scientists actually bought into that dogma, which still holds today, that they're separate, and it keeps us from like integrating or synthesizing. And it's so sad. It's like science shouldn't be dogmatic, but scientists, some are, and academia is. Or else there would have been at least one other parapsychology doctorate, right?
You'd think.
40 years? Come on. You can't be the only one that wants to get one, right?
Well, as I say, there are a few others at West Georgia College in the United States. There are a few people who have done doctoral work in parapsychology. There's a school called Saybrook that Stanley Krippner used to teach at. There's the California Institute of Integral Studies, the California Institute of Human Sciences. So there are a few places where at least you can have a few coursework at least, or there are professors who will sponsor students to do parapsychology projects. So it's starting to open up very, very slowly. The problem is, you see, on the scientific side, they're afraid of what they call the rising tide of superstition, which is real. I mean, we see it in our culture. Sure. And on the religious side, they're afraid that this stuff is real, but it's it's diabolic.
Yeah.
So they
You
warn
open
you
up
to
the-
stay away from it for that reason. So there's a lot of social pressure to prevent, big foundations and certainly the government from putting any money into this area.
But then they go do it on the sly, because this is another thing I want to ask you about. I have so many questions for you. But, the Grateful Dead started in basically Palo Alto, California. All roads, and there's a song called Terrapin, all roads lead back to Terrapin. And I think Terrapin might be Palo Alto because everything seems to come back to there in Stanford Research Institute. And, you hear all these things about the government and the military and intelligence agencies say that they don't study UFOs and all. The whole time they've been doing it. You were involved in some of that, right? You knew Ingo Swann or?
Well, I was very close with Russell Targ, who worked with SRI. And also, incidentally, I used to live in San Rafael, California, half a block from Jerry Garcia's house.
Yeah. Did you get to know him well?
No, I didn't. I didn't know him personally. Who I did meet was after Jerry died, an anthropologist bought the house, and he was having poltergeist experiences inside the house. So he called me up to see if I could help him out with that. And
wow. That's pretty wild.
So
you got to meet Jerry posthumously.
I got a tour of the house.
Well, I know Jerry was way into this stuff because I listened to a lot of interviews with him before I joined the band, and he mentioned a couple of UFO names. You throw out J. Allen Hynek, I was like, hey, whoa. Like he knows what's up. So I thought that was fascinating.
Well, and I also knew that he really didn't sleep a lot, and I guess he would sit up at night and read and nod off, wake up, read, nod off, and then talk about what he read the day after, like that was his, he always loved to rap and talk about the thing. So he was probably constantly taking stuff in the lucid, state. And that's where I think it lingers. That's where the stuff that's important kind of is tacky and sticks,
So I have a random question for you. On all of your, or most of your interviews, there's this really interesting statue in between you and the other. What is that? I finally saw it close up and I was like, okay, it's not what I thought it was.
I have had viewers say it looks like some kind of a grotesque fetus or something, but it's a beautiful piece of artwork. It comes from the Shona people of Zimbabwe in Africa. It's sculpted in soapstone, and the name of the sculpture is Family. And it actually, if you look at it closely, it depicts a father and a mother and 3 children.
Family. I love it. All right. So I have to ask you about Robert Bigelow. Mm. For the fans of Comes a Time that don't know, all the stuff you've seen about Tic Tac, UFO, and all that stuff, the USS Nimitz, I think it was called. And these things were studied by this program, either called ATIP or OSAP. I've heard so many different names. But Bigelow got the contract for that. I think he's a billionaire guy. He's like a Tony Stark, basically, and he's building some
I don't know who Tony Stark is.
He's in Marvel Comics.
Oh, okay.
Like Batman, he has
Bruce Wayne.
Bruce Wayne, exactly. For us older guys, he's Bruce Wayne. But yeah, I think his son died, right? And that was part of his interest. And then he also has the UFO interest. And he had a contest, and you won it. Can you talk about that?
First of all, hats off to Robert Bigelow. When I gave the acceptance speech, I won $500,000 in this contest. So they had a award ceremony that took place in Las Vegas at his company, Bigelow Aerospace. they design inflatable modules for space stations. And it was his plan to launch his own space station. However, what happened was the pandemic came along, and the governor of Nevada deemed his company a non-essential business. And so he had to let the employees go, and they scattered. And now it's questionable, can he ever bring them back again to continue the project? But in any case, that's where they held the award ceremony, in this room filled with these big inflatable space station modules. And
that's awesome.
I had the opportunity to give an acceptance speech in front of the group. And what I argued at the end of my speech is that other billionaires, the Richard Bransons and Elon Musks and of the world, Bill Gates and so on, especially the ones who are very interested in outer space, if they could just devote a small portion of their vast wealth, like Robert Bigelow has done, and follow his example and put some money into the exploration of the far reaches of human consciousness, not only would it be of great value for all of humanity, but in my view, if the human race is ever going to become a member of the community of interstellar space traveling species, we have to understand hyperspace. And hyperspace entails dimensions of consciousness as well. And in fact, I think if you want to understand the afterlife, you have to begin to look at hyperspace mathematics. If the afterlife is a real place, and there's plenty of empirical evidence to suggest that, yes, indeed, it is a place, then it has to be somewhere. And since it's not in three-dimensional space, another obvious place to look is hyperspace. Either that, or you've got to go down into 2 dimensions or 1 dimension or 0 dimensions of space altogether, which is another way to think of it. But probably all those things are true.
So when you say hyperspace, and when you let's say astral travel, or floating in a transcendence, is that where humans can access that space? Is that what you mean? Because I fully agree with you.
Future.
The Tibetans call it the Bardo plains. And you had, like, let's take the dream you had and I had of our uncles. It seems that dreams also occur in some kind of a space. The dream space is a space that involves your personal unconscious, but it also seems to border what the Tibetans would call the Bardo plains. So hyperspace can be incredibly complex. It may include dream space, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, so the so-called astral plane, and other planes that are described in the esoteric literature, the mental plane, and the Buddha plane, the causal plane, and so on. There are mathematicians who have worked out very precisely the geometry of higher dimensions of space. And I'll give you an example of what really intrigues me here. In lucid dreamers often report that if you've ever had a dream in which you're being chased, you're running, trying to escape something, but it feels like you can't move, you're stuck in quicksand or something. At that moment, if you become just a little bit lucid, a shift in consciousness, so that you can remember where you are, that's the point where you can start to fly.
I recently did that.
You did it. I've done it. Other people have reported it. It's in the literature. So that's what I would call a moment of transformation. And I think there is mathematical work that specifies in geometric terms, the kind of transformations that occur when you go from different dimensions of hyperspace from one to another. They're very extensive mathematics. And I wonder if it's possible to map out the kind of experiences people have in these altered states of consciousness to see whether the transformations that people such as you and I have both experienced, if they would be what we would say isomorphic to the mathematical models that already exist. If that's the case, we would have the foundations for an authentic scientific exploration of the afterlife, as well as other adjacent states of consciousness. And I'm pretty sure that if you were to have a lengthy conversation or explore the lengthy conversations that are reported by some people who say they know and talk to aliens, you would find that there's a relationship between interstellar space travel and these dimensions of consciousness.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say we had those dreams, but we had an MRI machine on during it. Is that how that mathematic equation is quantified or done? Or I guess my question is sort of, how is the math accomplished?
Yeah, the mathematics is sort of done purely on the basis of mathematical logic. There's no empirical testing, or very little empirical testing to date. Now, in physics, what you often find is the mathematicians come up with various theorems, and then the physicists later on discover, well, this matches what we're already doing in our experiments. String theory is a branch of physics, very controversial, but it is a branch of physics that relies on the mathematics of hyperspace right now. I'm not aware of its application yet in MRI studies of the brain, but in theory, perhaps that could be done.
Let's talk about some of the empirical evidence, though, that has been amassed, because you have a lot of great guests that talk about that, because people, like I said before, the government takes a stance, we don't study it, but the CIA paid for quite a lot, and so did the Navy and branches of military with SRI, like remote viewers, and they did the testing and proved it works. Can you talk about some of those things?
Well, okay.
And even ones that weren't necessarily CIA, like just dream experiments or whatever.
Well, let's look at the history. The Society for Psychical Research was founded in England in 1882. And it was at that time, there was a huge wave of popular interest in spiritualism, much as in, let's say, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was this huge wave of interest in psychedelics and human potential. Well, in the 19th century, it was spiritualism. They didn't have television, so people would have seances for their entertainment in the evening in their homes. And, they were reporting all kinds of phenomena. So some of the leading intellectuals of the day said, we ought to see if we can explore this scientifically. And this was at a time when, before they had sophisticated statistics, before they had double-blind experiments. So they would use the methods of criminology or the methods of the courtroom. They would try and document everything. They'd get affidavits from the witnesses and get descriptive accounts and case studies of what occurred. And that's still going on. I think it's very valuable research. Then starting in the 1930s, J.B. Rhine at Duke University felt that we could put this field on a stronger scientific basis by conducting experiments with statistical outcomes. And they were basically card guessing, dice throwing. And he established in the 30s the existence of what he called extrasensory perception and psychokinesis, or mind over matter, as well as precognition. So the emphasis shifted a bit at that time to let's look at the abilities of living people rather than searching for evidence of an afterlife. And that work continued. It was always controversial. Even today, it's rejected. Now in 2018, finally, after over 100 years of research, the American Psychological Association published an article in their flagship journal, The American Psychologist, reviewing all the scientific data in parapsychology.
Really?
Yes, including what they call meta-analyses. And so maybe in total, some 1,400 experiments. And what they found is that in spite of the critics refusing to accept the data was very strong and very good. In fact, one individual whom I've interviewed and who was one of the judges in the Bigelow competition, Jessica Utz, former president of the American Statistical Association, said, if this were any other field of study, the findings would have been accepted long ago.
Wow, no kidding.
The evidence is that strong. It's still statistical. In other words, you can't necessarily produce it on demand every time. Yeah. But some people are extremely gifted. Now, my friend Russell Targ at SRI, where they got government funding to the tune of about $1 million a year for 20 years in a row, was extremely successful. Over 90% of the experiments he did were direct hits. So there's a lot of good scientific data published in peer-reviewed journals supporting this phenomena. And yet, because we live in such a materialistic age, there is a group of scholars, they think of themselves as rationalists. And from their point of view, it's like they've already know how the universe works. And their attitude is, it doesn't matter what evidence you come up with, because from our point of view, it's impossible. So we don't even need to look at the evidence.
Jeez. Well, that's where I'm like, I don't mind you being a rationalist. Just admit you're also a dogmatist. Please, just own it, There's this thing that Stefan Schwartz said that really caught my ear at one point. We're having him on tomorrow. I just couldn't believe.
Oh, he's a good friend of mine. Yes.
It was the interview between you two that just, I was like, could you see if you can get both of them? But he said, I'm a Planckian. And I was like, what in the heck is a Planckian? I'd stop whatever I was doing. And for fans that don't know, he was talking about Max Planck, who was the other guy. It was like Einstein and Planck. And I guess Planck was the quantum physicist.
Founder of quantum physics.
And but this idea was the one. He said that Planck believed that consciousness, the non-local consciousness, as he called it, preceded space-time, and that space-time was born out of this non-local consciousness. And scientific materialists believe that it's the opposite, like the stew happened, life sprang up, consciousness evolved and he was like, no. And I was like, a scientist couldn't even admit that they believe that nowadays. Although I shouldn't say that, because some do, thankfully. And so that idea, I thought, well, and when you look in the Bible, the only time that God says what its name is I am that I am. And I was like, that's the non-local consciousness, which Planck believes everything proceeds from. And I was like, these things are not in conflict. They're just not. It's this dogma from both sides that keeps the conflict going.
Well, that's beautifully articulated, what you just said. That's the crux of the metaphysical battle that's going on for the minds of humanity. And of course, the idea that consciousness is fundamental. It's in the Bible. When you say God created the universe, that's essentially what you're saying. It's in the ancient Vedic traditions. It's well understood by ancient communities everywhere. And if you understand that consciousness precedes space and time, then it makes perfect sense. If you want to travel across space and time to distant galaxies and the like, you have to understand consciousness.
Yes, this is the Millennium Falcon. This is the time traveler. This is the dimension crosser. We do it involuntarily. We do it when we go to sleep. We could be walking and be like, uh-oh, what was that? And it just, I don't know if we could really help it. I think the people that it does happen to, I think it happens to everybody, but the one who bought into the strict materialist dogma, then it's like it doesn't exist. It's just, that's just random,
Well,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's very strong in our culture. If something is important to you, you say it matters. If something is that you grasp and you understand clearly, you say it makes sense. If you think you want to dismiss an idea, you say it's nonsense.
Immaterial.
Or immaterial. It's so deeply embedded in our language to think that matter is primary and that the senses are more important than our inner intuitions about things. My friend Bernardo Kastrup, who's a philosopher, one of the great proponents of what's known as idealist philosophy, that the universe is really mental, points out that the opposite view, the materialist view, is incredibly seductive.
Yeah. Of course, it worked for now.
It's what we base practically all of our technology on. And so it works for technology. And as a result, people assume, well, it must work for everything then.
But it's just illogical. Like if you look at the left brain, the right brain, I'm generalizing, the right brain's a more subjective side, the left brain's a more objective side. So the left brain in its pure objectivity, I would think would look at the right brain and go, hey, you're actually equal to me. What are you for? Like how can you just discount? It seems incredibly illogical and unscientific to not be curious about it since you experience it. And I also have like this, I would love to bounce this off of you. The next time I run into a strict materialist, I want to ask them, how can you prove that science even exists? Because science, the word means to know, right? So who is doing the knowing? If you can't prove consciousness exists, then then science doesn't exist. Even if you can reproduce it, you can't scientifically prove.
Well, there you put your finger on the biggest paradox in science and philosophy at all, is the existence of consciousness. People, as you say, they assume, consciousness exists, but there's no way that you can take a materialistic scientific model and build a conscious experience from that, let alone free will, let alone purpose and intention.
Exactly. And yet we experience it. That's why I try to go when they say, well, that doesn't matter. It's immaterial. I'm like, is love immaterial to you? You tell me, is nobody you love? Your mom? Somebody? Your children? Like, so is that love immaterial? Is it nonsense? No, it's not. Because if something happens, let me put a gun to their head. We'll find out how much it matters. Quick, right? I mean, I would never do that, obviously. But, I'm just saying.
Well, if I were to try to defend hardcore materialism, I'd say love is just a question of chemicals in the brain, something like that. They try to reduce it to chemicals, which doesn't really work, but people have these ideologies and they're very seductive
and reductive.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I'm like, yeah, I actually would agree that it's partially chemical, but that doesn't mean it's not spiritual. It's like that whole idea. I think it was Stefan again that was talking about, or maybe it was Lynn, who one of your guests was talking about how our nervous system is basically a bunch of strands that conduct electricity. And so we are antennas. Like our whole body is antennas. So we can perceive all these different things that are not, tangible, but maybe they're measurable. I don't know if there's an electrical impulse.
Well,
I don't know.
both.
So yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I'm okay with the chemical, our whole makeup, but that doesn't why do they have to be mutually exclusive?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've got a very good handle on things.
Except for I'm the crazy one. Oh man. Well, I wanted to ask. I have so many questions that I wanted to ask you about. Oh yes, there's this phrase that came up, and I even forget the context now. But you used it, polyphrenic psyche. Do you remember that?
Maybe polymorphic. Let me see. Polymorphic perversity. Is that it?
I thought I wrote it down right. Polyphrenic psyche. It was
Oh,
something
maybe
to do.
as
I think
opposed to
with
schizophrenic.
Interesting. Maybe that's what I am. I'm not schizophrenic. I'm polyphrenic.
There you go.
I think it was something to do with the PK man, which we should probably touch on anyway, because I knew, and I think I actually know another one right now because I saw him do this thing where he made the rain stop. The bass player for Lettuce. I have to tell you that story. But Colonel Bruce Hampton, one of my big mentors, was one of these people that was incredibly psychic. And weird things would happen, like my electronics in a Dreamtime segment I'm going to show when I was talking about him, and my video editor was editing it, and I said something about Bruce and it just zoomed in on me, and he was like, I didn't do that zoom, and it would show up here in this graph if I did. And Bruce just had all this kind of stuff attached to him like that. So when I heard about PK Man, I was like, that guy. Can you tell people about him?
Yeah, I was first introduced to the PK Man at SRI International back in 1976. I had gone there to experience remote viewing. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were there, and they were very excited. They had this big file. They said, this man has been badgering us all the time. He says he's the greatest psychic in the world. He says, you're wasting your time studying Uri Geller. I'm the greatest psychic. and he said, I'm going to prove it to you, because they were ignoring him. There was a drought in California in 1976. Serious drought. And he said, I'm going to end it. He said, and you'll know that I ended the drought because it's going to happen in just a few days. There's going to be rain and sleet and hail and snow and every kind of weather you wouldn't believe. And there's going to be power blackouts and UFO sightings, which is his signature. And your local newspaper is going to run a story saying the drought is over. And at the time, the stories were there's no end in sight to the drought. So all of this happened like within a few days. And Russell Targ sent him a letter saying that was a good prediction. And he wrote back and he said, hell no, that was no prediction. I caused it. And
wow.
These guys are getting funding at that time from the CIA. And Uri Geller, who they were working with, was already, as far as they were concerned, too public, too controversial. So they didn't want another person, a flamboyant psychic. So they asked me to take over this case. They said, it's really worth studying, but we can't do it. So would you mind looking into this? And please take the file out of our office.
Wow.
So that's how it started. And there was a publication in those days called Psychic Magazine. And somehow, I think, Puthoff Targ leaked a story. They knew the editor. And so a little news story got published about some psychic predicted he could end the drought, and it ended.
Wow.
Well, then, if I remember correctly, it would have been the next year, 77, I think it was, maybe 76. There was a drought in England. And people in England had heard about this, and some guy ended the drought in California. So they contacted him and said, can you end this drought we're having? And they flew him over to England to be part of a conference on parapsychology. And it was 76 too, I think, in the summer. And I was there at the conference. So that's where I met him in person. And he was this big, flamboyant American fellow. He walked onto stage when he gave his presentation carrying a little red toy wagon behind him, pulling it, stacked high with all of these papers. And he said, these are all the documents of his many demonstrations of his psychokinetic powers. And the British audience didn't go for that at all. They didn't, they don't like brash Americans. But they literally kicked him off the stage. And it's a strange story, but I stood up and vouched for him. I said, I happen to have firsthand information about what he had done in California. And you might not think that you should take a person like this seriously, but he has a track record. And so we became friends. I befriended him, and that began like a 10-year study. I worked with this man and studied his abilities until his death in 1987. And that was the basis of my book, The PK Man.
It's funny, they're kicking him off stage, and he's like, you know what? Enjoy your drought for another 6 weeks, everybody. I'm out of
here. The funny thing is, the day he arrived in London, the same thing happened. It rained, and it was
wow, that's
power blackouts, and the local paper wrote a story, the drought is over. When I first arrived in London, people told me, if you want to get your picture on the front page of the London Times, all you have to do is go down to Piccadilly Square with an umbrella. People will think you're crazy. They'll put your picture in the paper and you'll be famous.
That's funny.
Can you tell that story about when he, I guess he was on a plane and he had made the paper or whatever, and he got drunk and caused a mishap?
Well, yes, yeah, he had. There's a sequence, and it starts when he has a friend who's a radar operator in a radar station over the Chesapeake Bay, and in Washington, Virginia, that area, Maryland, and he's going to demonstrate that he can cause psychokinetic effects that are observable on the radar screen. So he does this. The radar operator reports, he's concentrated on the radar screen, and all sorts of strange effects occurred. So Owens did that. And then he said, you better not let any airplanes fly over this area for a while, because the psychokinetic effects last for a while, and it could be dangerous for airplanes. Well, I think there were 2 or 3 airplane crashes. Navy jets crashed in the Chesapeake Bay as a result of that. Whoa. And there was a journalist, a famous journalist named Otto Binder, who got word of it. Since you like comic books, Otto Binder is very famous in the comic book world. He worked on many comics, and he invented one called Shazam. That was him. his invention. So,
Wow.
but he also was a science writer, and he worked for NASA, and he published a story. It was published in Saga magazine about all these airplanes crashing in the Chesapeake Bay after Ted Owens did his psychokinetic experiment with the radar operator. And there's affidavits from the radar operator. It's all well documented. So at the time the Saga magazine article came out, Ted Owens had been invited by a rich benefactor to go to Egypt and see if he could do anything with the entities that they believed were inside the Great Pyramid. And Owens was there. He felt he had communicated with various occult entities inside the Great Pyramid. And he's flying back to New York. And he's up in first class and he's drinking. He was a big drinker. And he's got this magazine article of the airplane crashes, and he's showing off in front of all the stewardesses. Look at me, I'm the PK man, airplanes crash. So the plane is coming in because of lightning strikes, incidentally. The plane is coming in to land at Kennedy Airport when the airplane in front of his plane coming in for a landing was struck by lightning and crashed. It was at the time, this would have been in the 1960s, I think 67 or so, really before I met him. The biggest air crash in US history.
Whoa. Whoa.
And why I think it's significant is because his method of creating these psychokinetic phenomena is that he creates a drawing. He looks at a picture of what he wants to have accomplished.
Whoa.
And so here he is, drunk, focusing on a picture of an airplane crash being struck by lightning when it happens to the plane coming in right ahead of his own plane into Kennedy Airport.
That's a scary power for a heavy drinker.
Well, he used to
really
do it when he got drunk. People often, in fact, Ted Sirios is another one who does what were called thoughtographs. He would get drunk and create mental images on Polaroid film. There's a whole archive of his thoughtographs right now housed in the library at the University of Maryland. Okay. So we know so little about this. I do know that Ted Owens liked to get drunk and watch football games, and he'd have multiple TV screens going at one time, and he would pick the teams that were the underdogs to win by causing the favored team to fumble the ball. And
wow,
he had it was at one time a scientist named Max Fogel, who was the director of research for Mensa, because Ted Owens was a member of Mensa, did a study and determined for the season that Ted Owens was 75% accurate in causing the underdogs to win football games.
Now that's a good person to have around during the football season.
This is why I wanted to have you on, because I've watched so many interviews that you've done, and so much of it is like empirical evidence based.
Yeah.
You know, like Stefan he's not a religious person. He's a Planckian.
Yeah.
Everything is about data.
Mm-hmm.
You know, same with SRI and same with whatever, you know, it's like, it's data driven.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of empirical evidence, and people don't know about it because of this dogma, this emperor no clothes thing. You know, we're not allowed to talk about it. I was so impressed with Avi Loeb coming out and saying, hey, man, they talk about it in the ivory tower. They're just not talking about it in front of you.
Well, Avi Loeb is interested in extraterrestrial civilizations and the possibility that they could had sent a probe into our solar system. Some of the reasons, I think ultimately, the reason why people reject even the possibility that this could be real, rejected so strongly, they say, we don't even need to look at the evidence because we know it's impossible, is because of deep psychological fears. And it became very clear to me when I was a graduate student at Berkeley, the day that Arthur C. Clarke came to speak on the Berkeley campus.
My brother's favorite author.
He was, this is in the 70s, and Uri Geller was prominent, and Arthur Clarke had published a little note in Time magazine saying he didn't believe in Uri Geller. So he gave his lecture. And if you read his novels, you know he writes about psychic phenomena. The Childhood's End is a wonderful novel of that. So I raised my hand. I said, Mr. Clarke, do you believe in ESP? And his answer was very revealing. He said, no, I do not, because I don't want anybody to read my mind.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the basis of, I think, the resistance that people have to even acknowledging the possibility. And it goes back to Freudian psychology. Freud pointed out, we don't want to know what's in our own mind.
And see, I do.
And then you look at Dick Schwartz and internal family systems, which is totally opposite, where there's a dozen of us in there. And you open the, door and look into that room that has been shuttered up for so long. And, it's that fear. Love and fear, those are the two ways you operate.
Well, everybody's... It's scary knowing that Santa knows who's naughty and who's nice, because then he knows we're all naughty and nice,
Well,
wow.
If I think we're in an era, for better or worse, where people are beginning to say, we should learn what's inside of our mind. I mean, things like Jerry Springer on TV, having the most negative aspects of human behavior out in front of the whole public, like let it all hang out. And it's sometimes very unpleasant to watch. And it probably has certain detrimental social consequences. People feel more comfortable being rude, I think. But at the same time, we're beginning to come to a deeper understanding of, the fullness of our, at least the animal side of our nature. That's what we're afraid of. But until we can confront that, we're not going to get to the higher.
And you know what's interesting that you say about that, because I was not able to fully confront my animal nature until I had spiritual strength to draw from, because it's just the reptilian brain is just the oldest, strongest friggin' thing. Like, I need extra super something help with it, and I get it. I get it. So I don't know how people do it actually, I do know how people do it without it. Look at the world today, refugees here and war there, and just, depleted uranium bombs dropped on people. It's like, oh my God, what are we doing? Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you all day, man, but I really want to thank you so much for taking time with us. It's been so great to meet you, and I can hardly believe it, actually.
Well, you know what? I'm thrilled to meet you guys. I think you're doing a fabulous job. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm happy to return to your program. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
You're really, as far as I can tell, spot on everything that you've had to say, and you're reaching audiences that I don't ever reach. So I consider you to be fellow travelers on the path.
Ah, that's awesome. Yeah. Nice to know there's other people on the path sometimes. It could be a lonely place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just now finding it. I guess that old algorithm cuts both ways, doesn't it? It treats me good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I, for one, can't wait to have you back, because I got a lot more questions to ask.
Well, it'll be a pleasure. I really enjoyed being with you.
Thank you.